JD Oliva is here with me. We're going to talk about somebody who is going to be making a WWE debut in the very near future. They've invested a lot in him, and he just won the NCAA championships. Gable Steveson. JD, what is up?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me back on. Talk a little amateur wrestling. It's my thing, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, so I know the championships were last weekend. I saw lots of stuff about Gable and him leaving his shoes on the mat. Daniel Cormier was doing the commentary. So as far as Gable and his second back to back and his run, I from what I understand, it was a very impressive run for him.
I don't think it's incredibly impressive, right? I cannot remember the last time anyone medaled, let alone gold medaled in the Olympics in freestyle, and then came back and wrestled in college. Like it's probably been 30 years since that's happened. And what people aren't talking about enough.
Explain to people why that is hard and what the difference is.
Freestyle freestyle and Greco-Roman are what's wrestled throughout the rest of the planet. In the US, we wrestle what we call collegiate or folk style wrestling. It's a different skill set based on a different series of rules. So most Americans these days do have a significant exposure to freestyle. It's a lot bigger at the youth and high school and junior levels than it used to be in this country. This is what I do in my spare time. I'm the Greco national coaching staff of the country, and so we do this. We try to get these athletes experience in the international styles. And Gable Steveson he's one of the guys that came along in this new wave of talent that's come in the last decade. In the 2000, from about 2000 to about 2012, we were really struggling on the freestyle scene internationally, really, really struggling, like 1 or 2 medals a year if we were lucky. Zeke Jones, who's now the head coach at Arizona State, changed that. He created this RTC system where all these colleges around the country have their own freestyle coaches. So every major college has its own dedicated freestyle coach, and it's made a humongous difference in the US in general. So this is what I was trying to say is Gable did the gold medal in the Olympics of the heavyweight division and came back to wrestle in college. And that hasn't happened, I don't think, since the 80s. Like in Greco, it's happened a couple times. Brandon Paulson in 96, Garrett Lowney in 2000. But in freestyle, which is a leg attack style, which is closer to the college style, it's unheard of. Like there's such a significant difference between an NCAA All-American or national champion and a senior level medalist. It's not even funny. For Gable to come back and do what he's done is unreal. And what most people have ignored is that heavyweight has five age group world champions, right? Like Colton Schultz, who Gable beat in the finals, was a Greco-Roman world champion. Tony Cassiope won the U23 world title. Who's from Iowa? He won the U23 title this past fall. Mason Paris from Michigan has been a U23 world champion, and so has Greg Kirkleet, who Gable beat in the semifinals from Penn State. This division is so deep, and Gable just absolutely owned it. And I don't know if people understand that any one of those 4 other guys in a different era would have walked through the NCAAs, would have absolutely walked through it. And Gable is making them I don't want to make him look silly, but he's so significantly better than everyone else. It's scary.
So when it comes to like historical ranking, like it's kind of fun to compare. Obviously the athlete is different, the training is different, the access to nutrition and all these different things is much different in 2022 than it was in, say, the 80s. But like, you're a giant fan of this, and you go back through record books and stuff. Where do you see him fitting on the list of heavyweight wrestlers?
Internationally, I'd say it because he's stepping down. He's just a dude. He's not going to be Bruce Baumgartner, who medaled, I believe, in 4 Olympic games. That's a significant chunk of his life. But Gable was significantly better than Baumgartner in college, right? Bruce Baumgartner was a 1-time NCAA champion. When the NCAA put their 75th anniversary team together in 2005, Kurt Angle and Carlton Helserig were the 2 heavyweight representatives. Angle was a 3-time national champion. Helserig was a 6-time national champion. He won 3 in Division II, 3 in Division I back when that was legal. They're very different guys than what Gable is. Kurt Angle was a small heavyweight, about 220, very athletic, very much in the John Smith mold where he was out there, really doing a lot of leg attacks, a lot of speed, which at that time in the 90s wasn't seen from heavyweights. And Carlton Halserig didn't wrestle in high school. Right. He just would show up to the state tournament. He went to high school with no team and he would murder everyone because he was a monster. And then he wound up playing in the NFL, late
Yeah.
great Carlton Halserig.
Pittsburgh
Gable's
Steelers.
yeah, Pittsburgh Steelers. So he's very, very different than these guys. Gable is probably the most skilled because the game has risen so high. If Angle was around today, he'd be phenomenal. With this level of coach, because Gable is, I've heard people say Gable's a better athlete than Angle. I don't think that's true, but Gable's a really good athlete. They're different body types. Kurt Angle's about 215, 220.
Mhm.
Gable's about 260. So they're very different. But those are probably the four best guys that you would compare him with. I mean, because he's doing something that's really common in the US is he's won his gold medal and then he's going to move on, which is pretty much the course that most athletes in the US have taken over the last 60 years. Like
Mhm.
the US is very different than Russia or Japan or any of the former Soviet bloc countries where guys just, this is what you do, right? Jordan Burroughs, who has been the US flag bearer for the last decade, is the exception to the rule, and he's changed things. Like guys are sticking around more than one Olympic cycle nowadays. It looks like Gable's not going to do that, but he was just talking about maybe doing it again. So who knows what's going to happen?
So now let's transition to his WWE career. So do we know if he's been doing anything yet? Because I remember initially they said, oh, he's gonna train for his season, and then he's also gonna do some training for us. Like I didn't know how that could happen, but have you heard anything about his current pro wrestling training?
I haven't. I haven't heard anything about that. But, I imagine I mean, Brad Rheingans is right up there in Minneapolis, so I imagine maybe he's still I don't know, maybe I'm just guessing. Like, I know
Uh-huh.
that's what Brock did back in the day when he got tired of OVW. I know Brock has been in the room with Gable a few times to kinda work with him, so I imagine there's been some stuff done. His brother, I think, has debuted for NXT already.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I imagine there's some, but, I mean, he's coming into this super, super raw, and it's not an enviable position, to be honest with you.
And I don't imagine he's gonna take the NXT route because they drafted him to Monday Night Raw, even though he wasn't a top pick for whatever reason. If he's not a top pick, I don't know why they drafted him. And so he's gonna probably debut on the main roster. I don't know if I imagine he'll be at WrestleMania. We'll see him at WrestleMania. It would be pretty impactful if he kind of did something at WrestleMania, even if he's not ready. Obviously, there's an acumen that he needs to build up. But I've asked you this before, just about his personality, about the sort of the bigger than life that Vince McMahon wants from his guys. Have you changed your mindset on how successful maybe that he could be at this?
I think he could be as good as he wants to be at this. Like, he's really done a better job of showing up that personality lately. Like early in his run at Minnesota, he was definitely a bit of a heel. People know what I'm talking about. Um, and he would antagonize fans on Twitter. And then the last couple of years, he's really kind of turned a new leaf. Like he's really come off very grateful. He comes off as a good dude, but he can talk some stuff. He's a phenomenal athlete. He really is. But then again, he's also 21 years old. Like I don't he's leaving college in a time when everyone gets an extra year because of the COVID. So
Yeah.
he could have another year of wrestling if he wanted to. There were 3 guys wrestling last weekend that were 25 years old.
Wow.
There were 3 guys that were become the first ever 5-time All-Americans in college. Like he's so young. And when I say that, I mean he's 21. Like he just talked about maybe coming back for another Olympic run. If you follow him on Twitter, he'll flirt with the idea all the time of fighting in MMA. Like he's talked about maybe playing for the Vikings. He sounds like a kid, which is kind of what he is. He's only 21 years old. I don't personally, he doesn't strike me as someone who really loves this, right? And like, which is fine because that's where guys came from in the 60s and 70s, right? They all
Mhm.
came from football. So there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, there's so many more options for
Right.
guys now. I don't know how this is going to work, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I saw there was another comment where he said he's also interested in MMA in the UFC. Now, he knows that he's signed with WWE, that's his first priority, but he mentioned doing a Brock Lesnar and possibly starting in wrestling, then crossing over to MMA. Now that seems really hard in today's day and age, because when Brock did it, he was such an athletic marvel that he was able to use his strength and his speed to win some of those fights. I don't think anybody would ever say Brock Lesnar was a great mixed martial artist. So the level of mixed martial arts since Brock debuted has risen. And so Gable would be coming into a sport where, yeah, the great athlete piece of it maybe isn't as easy to utilize and overtake some of these more skilled guys these days.
The problem with being an Olympic gold medalist is people are looking to cash in on you immediately and put you into positions long before you're ready for them. I think that if Gable were to leave WWE, he would get a fight pretty big, pretty right
Yep.
much right out of the gate, way
Yep.
before he's ready for it. And I think that could expose him. I mean, we've seen, a guy like Aaron Pico, who was poised to become one of the best, wrestlers in his weight class, who just, left and decided he was going to do the MMA thing and was probably pushed way before Bellator, way before he was ready, and I'd hate to see that with Gable Steveson, but at the same time, I think that's what would happen. I do think if he wants to fight, I do think it's a mistake. I do think he should be fighting, because you can, it's easy. I think I'm not done either, so I can't say it's easier to go from one to the other, but it sure seems like you'd be in a better position to fight if you spent time learning how to fight now. So again, he really strikes me as a kid when he talks about these things. He wants to conquer the world, which is nothing wrong with that. That's what being 21 is all about. But I don't know if he really gets what this whole thing is going to be, especially the WWE in 2022 is a lot different than it was in 2005 or 6 whenever Brock left. So same with UFC. I mean, these are completely different worlds. So I don't know, man. I hope he's making the right calls, but it's going to be interesting.
So he's obviously got guys like Brock, like Paul Heyman, like Daniel Cormier, who he can turn to, who he could get advice from. What is the the college coach's role in this? I imagine he's got a good relationship with his coach. He's been the ace guy forever. Like, does the coach is he passing him off to other guys to get this advice from, or is he at the same time kind of helping Gable manage through these waters? Like, what is the job of the coach there?
Brandon Eggum has been the guy at Minnesota for a long time. He was an assistant coach before Jay Robinson stepped down. So he's been in that system forever. Like I think Brandon Eggum and Brock were teammates back at the U in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. So the Stevensons moved to Minnesota. They're from Indiana. They moved to Minnesota to wrestle for Apple Valley, which at the time was the best school in Minnesota, so they could go to Minnesota. So they think Dad wrestled for Minnesota too. So I mean, like, they've been part of this system forever, right? So Eggum is going to watch after his guy, but at the same time, I think he probably trusts Brock, right? They've known each other for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So I think that they're comfortable handing him off. And there's, Chad Gable's is from just down the road in St. Michael, Albertville. So I mean, like, there's a lot of ties, from Minnesota and into the pro wrestling world, and there's a lot of good people that are associated with that Minnesota Golden Gopher program that are going to be looking out for Gable and trying to do what's right by him. But big money, and he seems to want the stardom and the fame. So I mean,
Right.
coach gets him ready. I mean, he's been under a spotlight. Gable came up in an era when high school kids had wrestling, and specifically has had more spotlight than they've ever had before, and college kids have more spotlight than they've ever had before. The NCAA just announced what their ratings were for the finals, and we beat NXT. So I mean, like, for amateur wrestling, that's real big. So I mean, and he's the star. He's been the star of the show. Him and the Penn State team, there were the two big narratives coming out. So he's been under a microscope forever. I think he's ready for it. I mean, they got him as ready as possible.
So you mentioned the ratings. They also were able to have a full house for the first time in a couple years, right?
Yeah, well, they usually do really well selling tickets and always
Yeah.
have. Like, it's always a tough ticket to get is NCAA tickets. Last year was the COVID thing, and it was weird. I didn't get to go because the COVID thing. And from what I was told by my friends, it was pretty cavernous in there. And this year it was back to normal. It was packed. The year Minnesota hosted it, it was going to be huge. I think it was going to be in the dome up there, whatever they're calling the dome up there now. And it would have been enormous. So we didn't quite get to that, but things are back to normal.
Okay, so last thing, Gable Steveson is not the only collegiate wrestler who's got charisma and who's a badass. Who else should be on WWE's radar, and maybe already is on WWE's radar and could follow him to the big world wrestling entertainment?
Well, the obvious answer is AJ Ferrari from Oklahoma State. That's the guy who signed. What I haven't heard enough people in our circles talking about is AJ had a horrific car accident
Yes.
earlier this year, and looking at the wreck. I mean, I'm amazed he walked away from. I'm amazed he survived. Quite frankly, it was very irresponsible driving. I'll just leave it at that. John Smith, his coach, the head coach of Oklahoma State, gave an interview just yesterday where they asked him how AJ was doing, and Coach Smith's a straight shooter, and he said, we're in a critical spot right now where AJ's gotta the next couple months can be very important. So nobody's really heard much from him. AJ was kind of spouting off on Twitter because he wants that match with Max Dean from Penn State, who just won NCAAs, and that's gonna be one of the matches to watch a year down the line. But I mean, physically, I don't know. I don't know where he's at right now, and there's not a lot of people talking a lot about it. I mean, it went from "Oh yeah, he'll be okay, he'll be fine" to not a lot of people saying much. I mean, that's kind of their golden child wrestlers other than Gable, right? I think Joe Spivak from Northwestern, a football player, is someone who I think is going to have a tremendous amount of success with this whole thing. He's got a big personality. He's going to be very, very successful. The Cabinet girls from Fresno, they're going to do really well. I'm very interested to see what they can come up with in the future with this next wave of guys. We don't have a lot of big brash personalities in amateur wrestling. There's not as many as there could be because for so many years, like not me, but I mean the culture has kind of coached it down, and that's been changing a lot. Like I would love to see a guy like a Tony Cassiope from Iowa get a look. I think he'd be good for that environment. Like there's a handful out there, but the sport right now is being dominated by Cale Sanderson and the Penn State guys, and they're so humble, and they talk about being grateful for everything, and they're not brash, they're not showboaty. It's gonna be interesting. Like AJ really sticks out in this group, and for his sake, I hope he's able to kind of pull himself back together.
Yeah, that's you mentioned Gable being sort of young and 21, and there's imagine being sort of on top of the world and being that young and thinking, rules don't really matter for me. So I very much, like you said, hope that he completes his recovery, because you've been mentioning him to me and
Mhm.
to other folks as a possible person with a lot of
Yeah.
charisma.
Yeah, he's the guy right now other than Gable, and I don't honestly, I don't know who else that would be other than those guys at the moment.